The crowd is absolutely wild as Verne Gagne's all-star wrestling goes coast to coast and continent to continent. The greatest wrestlers in the world.
He may be an apprentice carpenter, but I guarantee you he is a seasoned ring veteran.
I've been hit with bar stools, bar rags, barmaids.
I'm talking to you.
They're scared that Hulkamania's still running wild. Oh, yeah. I got a big fat wife and 9 kids at home, and I gotta feed them.
And take a look at Jesse the Body in real life.
Open your hand once, if you would.
You understand?
This is absolutely unbelievable. Totally, completely out of control.
He's coming in over the top. Hey! Look out!
You know, the more I look at that open, the more it scares me. And I'm going to blame Joe Ciupik for that. And you want to know why? Because it is Mr. Over the Top Rope and Mr. Roll Under the Bottom Rope, Mick Karch. Because that is a very
who would be rolling under the rope, by the way, just to clarify.
Yeah, Mick. Yeah, you're like fucking 10 feet tall, so you're gonna go over the top rope. You know why that open scares me? Because it's like I'm talking to you, right? And then I just, what the hell is a bar rag? A barmaid? Like, what is that?
You know, I'm not going to go to the bar rag, barmaid thing yet. I want to go back to what Ciupik just said, that snide remark about rolling in under the bottom rope. I can't roll in under the bottom rope. It's not possible. My stomach, when I'm on my back trying to roll in under the bottom rope, they'd look for a harpoon.
Tuck it, Mick. It's not the first time you've been asked, but tuck.
Boy, well, that's the end of this week.
Right. Hey, we're gonna have some fun, you guys. We're gonna forego all of the plugging and all of the promotion because you guys know the deal. Subscribe to the Patreon, do the YouTube thing, all that. But we're gonna get right into it because we have got, I don't think it's hyperbolic, guys, someone that you guys both know and have worked with, and someone that to me has given me some of the best memories of my wrestling fandom. And lest I say maybe one of the most influential people in the history of the wrestling business. And that's a shoot. I don't think that's overstating it or overselling it whatsoever, Mick.
No, it's not. And, it's interesting if you think about it. And, no, it's not hyperbolic and it's not overstating. Aside from Mr. McMahon, there's no question that this individual that we're going to be bringing on right now is the most influential personality in pro wrestling. And before we bring him on, you can't overstate this. Nobody before or since has been able to derail the WWF juggernaut in its tracks, in its heyday.
WWE, Mick. WWE, get it right.
WWE, WWF, ABC. That's the reality of it. And it's been talked about many, many times, but there are not enough kudos for this guy. I mean, it's pure genius, and it's that simple. Nobody had been able to do it. He came up with the formula to do it. It was magic. It lasted for an awful long time. And
83 weeks.
Yep,
oh,
you
damn
got
it. I
it.
just gave away the spoiler.
You did,
I'm
but that's
awful
all right because there's no question about it. And again, kudos aren't enough, and we're putting the guy over because he deserves to be put over. So let's bring him on, our good friend Eric Bischoff. Eric, there you are, sir. Yes, there we go.
How are you guys, man? It's so good, and it's really good to hear all those great things because, like I said right before we roll tape, man, I don't hear a lot of good shit, man. People still out there bearing me. So I appreciate that very much.
Well, people are going to say what they're going to say, and the wrestling fans, compared to what they were 20 years ago, it's a different breed right now. And the slings and arrows are probably going to get worse before they get better because everybody's a keyboard warrior. Everybody can sit and critique everything. But bottom line is you did it. And whatever the formula was, you got it done in a major way, and they cannot take that away from you, no matter what they say, period.
Well, it's good to be with you guys. Look, I joke about that kind of stuff because literally, if you follow me on social media or if you watch my YouTube show, I kind of encourage bad behavior, and I love it when people come out and start throwing grenades at me and shit like that because I turn all that into really fun content.
Yeah,
and I'm making a shit ton of money off of doing it. So keep it coming, folks. Don't let any of these good things these guys say about me affect your thought process whatsoever. You just keep throwing those grenades. I'll keep having fun with it. I keep making money. You get to express yourself. It's what makes the world go round.
So, Mick, I just want to say this to Mick. With what Eric said, you cost Verne millions when you said the Midnight Rockers. You putting Eric over just cost him millions too.
I know. So
why can't you just not do
I can't just shut up. Every time I open my mouth and put somebody over, they get buried. I don't know how that works, but it does.
Eric, you could say that controversy creates cash.
Sure.
To
see
play
what he did there. Yeah,
but I chuckled a little bit earlier when you said before we roll tape. So that dates all of us because tape.
Did I even say that?
You did. Before we rolled tape, we were talking about it. It's like tape is dead, but that's a perfect segue into the first question. Actually, it's just more of I was there when you first started with the AWA.
First day I walked in the door.
Yep, with the Ninja Star Wars games.
There you go.
With Sonny Ono, I believe. I don't know if Sonny came in with you, but...
No, Sonny didn't come in with me on that first meeting. But, Sonny was definitely part of the deal. He kind of really created the game.
Yeah, but just expand on that a little bit. Tell us about how... I mean, that really was your advent into the AWA.
Yeah, it was. And it was all happenstance, Joe. I moved to Minneapolis from Pittsburgh, I think around 1970. I think I was 15 years old when I got there. No friends. I just moved in, didn't know anybody. And just like I had as a kid growing up in Detroit, I watched professional wrestling, big time wrestling out of CKLW, Windsor, Canada. And I watched professional wrestling with my grandmother, Agnes. Her name was actually Agnes, and she looked like an Agnes. she and Polish Joe, you'll love this. I'm going to tell a little story. I hope you guys got all fucking day because I might.
Oh, we're here. We're here.
Time.
So this is really. I'm going to keep myself on track because I'll end up off in the weeds in another zip code if I don't watch myself. But Agnes, Grandma Agnes. Her maiden name was Pohl, P-O-H-L. And throughout her entire my life for sure, but as long as anybody can remember, she claimed she was German. Now, this is back in Detroit. My grandmother was, she was born in like 1898 or 7 or some shit. She was old. When I was a kid, she was old. But in Detroit, where I grew up, like, everybody had Polish jokes. Like everybody made fun of they called them Polacks, which I'm sure is an insult, but whatever. It's what I grew up with.
Yep.
But they made fun. It was always Polish jokes. Everybody, kids in school, neighbors' parents, doesn't matter. And my grandmother was kind of like embarrassed to admit she was Polish, so she told everybody her maiden name was Pol, but it was actually Polski. And we found out right before, because this is before Ancestry.com and all that shit. You just had word of mouth, right? She was actually Polish. And she had this giant schnoz on her. and she was mean as hell. She did not like, I won't say she hated me. That would be too strong, but she didn't like me at all. But the only time she was nice to me, or at least wasn't angry with me, was when we watched professional wrestling together. I used to sit with Grandma Aggie. That's what they called her. They used to pass her around. Like my mom and dad, she'd live with us for like 3 or 4 months until my family went batshit crazy. And then my dad would send him to his brother and she'd stay there. So she got passed around like a hat, church or something. So she cycled in and out like 2 or 3 times a year for a couple months. But that was the only time we got along, is when we watched professional wrestling. Okay, there's the Aggie story. So that's me as a kid in Detroit. When I was about 13 years old, I moved to Pittsburgh. And same thing, no friends, just new kid on the block. First thing I go to, professional wrestling. It was also the first time I found out that there's more than one world champion. To say that I was confused is an understatement. But I became a big fan of Pittsburgh, big time wrestling in Pittsburgh, whatever it was called. I think it was big time. And then lived there for 2 years. I moved to Minneapolis. Boom, what do? I start watching wrestling, AWA, when I was like 16 years old, 15, 16 years old. And that's where I formed, I think, even though I watched it as a kid, I started really paying closer attention to it when I was about 15, 16, 17. And not like, I was trying to figure it out, what's real, what's not real. Not that. Mm-hmm. Just paying attention to the stories and the characters. And I wasn't studying it, but I was just so fascinated by it. One more quick story, because there's a lot of them to tell.
Well, even Grandma Agnes knew about, she's working the territories, going around and around from place to place.
Nobody knew that there was territories. There's only one.
That's right.
I mean, I got to Pittsburgh and I go, whoa, who's this Bruno Sammartino guy? Who the fuck is this guy? He's crazy. He's a fraud. Wait till the champ in Detroit hears about this.
Yeah. God.
Anyway, that's how I cut my teeth on AWA. But back to your question, Joe. I had done a lot before ever getting into wrestling. While I was in Minneapolis, I went to St. Cloud State University for a year till I was asked to leave. And then I went to the University of Minnesota, and I was paying my own freight. To be honest, I really couldn't afford it. And part of it was because I had my own landscaping construction company, that I tried to run about 6 months out of the year so I could go to college. But I found myself making so much money on the landscape side of things. I'm thinking, why am I going to college? I'm probably making twice as much as my professors, and I can make more if I put more time into it. So I just got tired of college real quick. It just didn't make sense to me at the moment. And I put myself full-time into my landscape construction company, merged with a good friend of mine who was doing kind of the same thing. He was doing more commercial work. I was doing more residential work. So we decided, hey, why don't we, come together, add in some commercial lawn maintenance into the equation. And we had a company called Natural Green Landscaping in Minneapolis. And we became fairly quickly, the number 3 commercial landscape construction company in Minnesota.
Wow.
Yeah, I was 22 years old. 22 years old, and at that time, making a substantial amount of money. I don't know how much it was, but it was enough for me to buy my first house on Lake Minnetonka when I was 21.
Wow.
Not a big house, don't get me wrong. It wasn't like a big friggin' mansion. It was probably 1,200 square feet. It was built in the 1900s. It was really cool. It's still there. But, 21 years old, I go buy my first house, and I'm living large, and got bored, actually, because I started coming out here to Wyoming in my free time. Once I came out here to Wyoming, it's like, fuck, I'm not going back to Minnesota, plant trees and shit. Get out here and hang out with some rodeo guys, and there's all these, they call them buckle buddies out here. Well, they call them ring rats in wrestling, but rodeo has buckle buddies. And yeah, that was fun in my 20s. So I would come out here to Wyoming, and I said, you know what? I don't want to own a landscape. I'm 22 years old, 22 years old at the time. I said, it's too much work. I want to have some more fun. So I sold my half of the company to my partner, which gave me some runway financially to do whatever I want to do for a year or two. And I just came out here to Wyoming and hung out. Time to get serious again. Moved back to Minnesota because I had been teaching martial arts too. I was a martial arts instructor in Minnesota for a while. And decided, okay, it's time to get serious. I'm going to get a job. I was first as a salesman, then I was promoted to a sales manager for a company called Blue Ribbon Food Service. And despite what Hulk Hogan said about me selling meat in the back of the truck, it was a full, Blue Ribbon Food Service was a processing company that handled all kinds of meat, vegetables, chicken, pork, all that kind of shit. So I worked there for a while, and then here it comes, Joe. Because of my martial arts experience, I traveled, like I fought competitively and all that, and had met this cat named Sonny Ona, who was also a martial artist, a really, really good one too. We became friends. We traveled the country together. We fought in tournaments together, not against each other. He's a tiny little fucker. I could put him in my pocket and take him for a walk. But I'll fast forward through this because it's a long story, but it's interesting. One day, Sonny and I were at a karate tournament, a martial arts tournament, and we got done. We were done competing, and of course, we got to a bar, started drinking. And Sonny is really the same age as I am, but he grew up in Tokyo, and I grew up in Detroit. And we grew up very similarly, very lower end of middle class, very low end of middle class. And I, drinking a couple of beers, I said, Sonny, what did you used to do when you were a kid growing up in Tokyo? And he explained his childhood to me, the kind of shit that they used to do. And I said, when I was a kid, we used to throw rocks at, not hard rocks, not stones, but these big clumps of dirt. So that when they hit you, they would go poof. And they'd hurt a little bit, but not much. And because we were playing Army, because back then in the 60s, Combat, the TV series, it was just, it was still kind of glorified. So as kids, we go out and play Army. And Sonny said, yeah, we kind of did that too. We used to go around and we'd pick up these milk bottle caps, because evidently in Japan back at the time, you get your milk in these little bottles and they had a little cap on it, you pop it off. And sometimes kids could find these caps in the street, and they would pretend that they were these little shuriken stars, is what they're called. They're ninja stars. And they play tag with those, just like I was throwing clumps of dirt. These guys were throwing these little milk bottle caps. Okay, by probably 1:30 in the morning, we had like napkins all over the table, and we were drawing pictures of this Ninja Star Wars game, where you buy the game. It comes with a black felt vest with a little ninja character screenshotted on there. You get a little headband like Karate Kid, because it's back in the 80s. Karate Kid was a big damn deal. So we had a little headband so you could look like Ralph Macchio or whoever the fuck it was. And it had a little piece of plastic that was real thin, and it would protect your eyes. And in each box, you got 3 big red stars that were Velcro, and they were soft. They were cushioned. But there was a little 2-penny washer right in the middle of it, so it had some weight to it. You could throw it across the room, right? And you get 3 red ones, 3 white ones. So if Joe and I are playing, I've got my 3 stars. My goal is to hit him with 3 stars that stick before he hits me with 3 white stars that stick. Hey, the winner. So we got the idea for this game and then took the plunge. Sonny went and found a manufacturer in South Korea to manufacture not a couple hundred, because at that point they were too expensive per game. You had to produce a volume of them. So we produced 5,000 of these games because we were so convinced we were going to be millionaires. We produced 5,000 of these games, had them shipped to the United States. They finally arrived, and I went, where are we going to put them? I have a garage that I can't fit my car in. It's so small. I don't even have a basement or an attic. Sonny lives in Iowa. So we got these games all over the neighborhood, right? Hey, I went to my next door neighbor. They were like 75 at the time, but I knew they didn't drive, so they had a vacant garage. So I said, hey, I'll give you $20 a month if you let me use your garage to store these. So anyway, I had games stashed all over. And then we're sitting around, we're going, well, how do we sell them? We hadn't thought about that. We were so excited about the game. We hadn't even thought about how we were going to sell them. So I started going around. There used to be a store, it may still exist, at Ridgedale Mall. They had a store.
Sure.
Yep. GameStop, right? You go in there and buy video games and all kinds of games. So my wife and I would stand out in front of, like on a Saturday morning, we'd go to GameStop. They allowed me to do it. I'd put like 50 games inside the store, sign on it, and I'd stand out in front with my wife and we'd play tag, right? People walking by and they'd see my wife and I throwing the shit together at each other, and then they would come in and they'd watch us and they'd buy a game. And I'm thinking, okay, now we only have 4,996. So at this point, I was a sales manager. I was doing well financially. I mean, not great, but I was doing pretty well. And I got the idea because I used to watch. I would come home in the afternoons because my schedule was going to the office in the morning, come home for a couple hours in the afternoon, and I would go back in the evenings and then check in all the salespeople that worked for me at that point, go through their day and figure out what they accomplished and all that kind of shit. So I had a couple hours during the afternoon, usually around 3 o'clock. And that's when the AWA ESPN show aired, sometime 3, 4 o'clock, whatever it was. And I'd watch it. And then one day, and this is back when Suzanne Summers was doing a Thigh Master thing. I love that commercial, by the way. It was fun.
Yeah.
It helps shape a lot of things about me that we're not going to discuss.
Thank goodness this is only a neck up show for Mick.
But I'm thinking, well, if she can sell Thigh Masters on a wrestling show, I bet you if I could get my Ninja Star Wars game in a commercial, and I could sell them just like Suzanne's selling those Thigh Masters. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to call Verne Gagne. Because I wrestled at Minneapolis Senior High School. I was average. You know, on a good day, I was average. But I loved it. I just loved it. And I made varsity and all that. But I was not a stand-up by any stretch. But I loved it anyway. So I was in the regional tournaments. And a lot of times Verne, because he lived in Mound at the time, which is just down the road, he would come to the regional tournaments, Region 5 at that time. He would come, especially for the finals, and he'd go around and meet kids and inspire them and all that. So I had met Verne once or twice in that way when I was in high school. Also had met him, Joe, you may remember this. I don't know if you were there yet. But even before the Ninja Star Wars thing, while I was probably at St. Cloud State University, I was part of the Minnesota AAU freestyle wrestling team, and I was a part of the Minnesota AAU Greco-Roman wrestling team. It was amateur. This was after high school, college age. And I was just doing that for fun. Again, I was average at best, but I really, especially Greco, I really loved Greco-Roman wrestling. And I had met Verne in that environment. And at that time, as I was it was the freestyle team I was a part of, we were going to compete against Sweden, the Swedish AAU freestyle team. And our AAU club, was out raising money, for the club. And my job was to try to raise some money. So I went, I'm going to call Verne Gagne and see if I can get on the show that was being produced over at WTCN channel. It's now CARE, I think, but it was WTCN at the time, those studios. And I called. I said, here's my name. Nobody knew me, obviously. And I want to come in. I represent the Minnesota AAU freestyle wrestling team, and we're competing against the Swedish team, and I'm raising money. And do you think I could get on wrestling to talk about it? And they said, sure. Come on down to the studio. I didn't expect that.
No.
I just wanted to say I tried. So I got down to the studio where they're taping, and Marty O'Neill.
Oh, God.
Marty O'Neill interviewed me, and Al DeRocha was there. He was on set. Verne didn't join, but I got interviewed by Marty O'Neill about this AAU thing, and that I was raising money. Anyway, it was a little bit I had to remember. But going back to Verne in Ninja Star Wars. So I'm looking at this AWA on ESPN. I'm thinking, well, shit, kids are home from school. Kids are watching wrestling 5 days a week. I'll put this on there. I called once again. I called the AWA offices. This is Joe while you were there. 545-3822 is the phone number. How about that? I still remember the phone number. 612-545-3822. I love that. So I called 545-3822 and talked to whoever it was on the phone. I just explained. I said, hey, I've got this idea. Oh, by the way, I wrestled Minnetonka Senior High School. I met Verne. I was a part of the AAU freestyle team, the Greco-Roman team. I'm friends with Dan Chandler, who's a big name in Greco-Roman wrestling. I wasn't really friends, but he was kind of a coach. But I bullshitted my way a little bit.
It all worked.
And I said, I'd just like to come in and talk to Mr. Gagne and see if he'd be interested in an idea that I have. Sure, come on down. Just like the first time. Whoa, I didn't expect that. So I came in there, and Joe, you may have been a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I came in with the game, and we went into Verne's office where he had that big, long, Knights of the Round Table kind of bullshit. It was like 8 feet long. Verne was sitting at the end of it, and then everybody else was sitting around. Mike Shields was in there. Greg Gagne was in there. Verne's secretary, I can't remember her name, was in there. Was it Kathy?
Pat.
Yeah, Pat was in there. Joe was probably in there. So I just took a game out. I said, here's what I got. And we started chasing each other around a little bit, showing them how the game worked. I explained the idea of the commercial. It's called a PI, or per inquiry, kind of an idea, but I didn't know the name of it back then. It was just the Susan Summers thigh muscle. I said, I'll shoot the commercial. Didn't even know how to do that, by the way, but I said I would. I said, I'll shoot the commercial. I'll pay for all that. I've got the game. Here's how much the game cost me. I think the game cost me like $4, $5 at the time. We're selling them for $20. I said, I'll split the profit with you. Well, Verne had a lot of excess commercial inventory in his show anyway. He wasn't really selling it, but he had 6 minutes of it. So it was no skin off Verne's ass to give it a try. It didn't cost him a dime. So we tried it, and it worked. Kind of, sort of. Not as well as I'd hoped, because I ended up eating about 2,000 games. But through that process, and Joe, maybe on your side of it, you may have heard different conversations, but I got a call from Mike Shields a couple of days after that meeting and said, hey, we need somebody to sell AWA in syndication throughout the upper Midwest. I think you're a pretty decent salesman. Would you be interested? Wow. There, about 2 days, probably 20 minutes later, I'm in the office meeting Joe Ciupik and Mike Shields, and was offered a job.
I remember all of that so fondly. And can you believe it was almost 40 years ago, Eric?
I tell the story fairly often throughout a year because people always, people are always curious how somebody in the wrestling business actually ends up in the wrestling business, because it's kind of an odd career choice.
Yeah.
And it's hard, it's hard to figure out a way in. Mine was just really coincidence. I didn't plan on it. I never even aspired to it. I never thought, wow, wouldn't it be great someday to work? I never thought of it. To me, it was just something that, watched on television and enjoyed, like a movie or a TV show. I never thought of being a part of it.
Just think if you wouldn't have been booted out of St. Cloud State. No.
I know. I might have actually graduated and been just like everybody else. Oh my God. My biggest fear in life is to be
what a great story. And the part that fascinates me is that twice they said, yeah, come on down. I mean, that is so like, is this the AWA that Eric's talking about? Or they just
as long as you had the wrestling part of it, the amateur wrestling part, boom, automatic in for Verne, because he was such a huge supporter of amateur wrestling.
Amateur wrestling in all sports. He's a big supporter of, University of Minnesota, obviously, and contributed a lot of time, and I'm assuming, when things were rolling, probably a lot of money. But yeah, that amateur wrestling, especially Region 5, Minnetonka, Mound, that was a soft spot. And I knew that, because I saw it as a kid in high school. I saw how much time Verne spent supporting amateur wrestling kids. And I thought, well, if he felt that way then, he might still feel that way now. So that was my calling card.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's nice to acknowledge that too, though, because to me, I feel like that's part of figuring out how to get into that next level is knowing what that connection is and then trying to build off of that.
Yeah. Well, it worked. And, Mike Shields, one of the things, I don't feel bad about much in life, I just because it's my mindset, everything that's ever happened to me, whether it's good or bad, adds to what I am today. I've learned more from my mistakes than I've ever learned from my successes. And I value mistakes and choices, even though they might not have turned out well. The experience of it, I value. So it's hard for me to say I regret anything because I'm in a pretty cool place right now. But I regret over the last 20 years or more not acknowledging Mike more. I have, and I've spoken very highly of him, but probably not enough and often enough, because it wasn't Verne, I don't think, that said, hey, why don't we hire this guy? It certainly wasn't Greg. I think it was really Mike Shields who went, this cat can sell shit, and we need somebody that can sell shit. It was really Mike that opened the door for me. Obviously, Verne, made it possible, but it was really Mike was the one that saw something that, changed my life forever.
Well, he changed mine. There it is. Remember that control room, Eric?
Oh, I do. And do you know what, Joe? Here's something. Is that me sitting behind you? Yeah, it is.
No, that's Juice. Gary.
Oh, Juice. Yeah, Juice. We have the same hair. It's kind of hard to tell.
Well, but his hair, shall we say, and I think you told me once early that you started going gray like when you were 20, didn't you?
Yeah, I was early 20s.
Yeah. So Juice still has a full head of hair. He's got the salt and pepper working now, but he's still doing good.
Yeah. But I remember, here's my fondest memory. And this is one of the things that also led me to think about doing other things in wrestling. Is Joe would, by himself, would sit in there at night and edit. Now, I didn't even want to try to learn how to edit because to me it just looked too complicated. Too many lights, too many buttons, just too much going on. I would eventually learn because I felt like I had to fully understand the entire process. I had to have at least a fundamental understanding of how to edit. But that didn't happen until WCW. So I would sit back and I would sit behind Joe just like Juice was. And I would watch him edit just to try to understand the process of it. Not to do it, just to understand it. Because I was really curious about how images and sound actually end up on a television. It's kind of like here in today's world, there are people, my kid, 40 years old, grew up with a microwave. Couldn't imagine life without a microwave.
Right. Yeah.
But like anybody that you would meet on the street, if you walk up to them and say, I've got $1,000 in my pocket. If you can tell me how your microwave actually works and how it makes your food hot, I'll give you $1,000. You'd walk around with $1,000 in your pocket till you ended up going back home at night. Nobody knows how it works. TV for me was the same thing. I grew up with it. It was a huge part of my life, but I had no freaking idea how it worked. And working in AWA, because of the nature of the company at the time, it just allowed me to sit behind Joe and watch him edit and begin to learn how TV ends up in a home. And as I'd watch Joe edit and just begin to learn the process, when Joe was done editing, then he had to dub tapes. Now I'd watch Joe dub tapes. And I know Joe's going to laugh his ass off at this because it sounds so ridiculous, but you have to imagine what my interest level was at that time, because this is the first time I'm being exposed to any aspect of post-production. It was all like stepping into the cockpit of the Starship Enterprise to me. It was. As fundamental as that studio was, to me, it was awesome. So I'm watching Joe threading this 1-inch tape, and I'm going, fuck, I bet you I may not know how to edit, but I bet you he could teach me how to do that. So I asked Joe to teach me how to thread a 1-inch tape, because while I didn't want to try to learn how to edit or take time out of Joe's process to teach me, but I knew if I could learn how to do those 1-inch if I could learn how to dub tapes, Joe wouldn't have to stick around at night when he was done editing. I would feel like I'm accomplishing something and learning something. And I looked forward to, I'd be in there all day, and when it was time to dub tapes once a week, whatever it was, twice a week, I'd sit in there and dub tapes for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours at night because it was fun. And I felt like I was a part of that process of getting a television image onto the screen. It was a really weird sense of accomplishment for me. And I felt so proud once I actually got half as good at it and could get it all done in a timely fashion and not fuck it up.
Eric, you're talking about that. I think back to what I believe was your very first video project, and that was you and I put it together, the best of the 80s. You remember that?
Oh, vividly, because Mike Shields gave us both a lot of rope. Mm-hmm. He let you know, he kind of watched over you and I, and I think it was because you and I were talking probably one of those nights when, you know, I was watching you edit and I was dubbing tapes or whatever. Because you remember back in the backside of your studio, there's stacks of 1-inch tapes, 3, 4, 5, 6 foot high. There's like all of those tapes from all of the shows that Verne produced. A lot of it throughout the 80s was just all stacked up. They didn't know what to do with it. They didn't throw it away, thank God, but they didn't know what to do with it either. So I don't know how it, you know, it was a long time ago, Joe. I don't know how it came, but it was like, wow, there's Road Warrior footage. Here's some Hulk Hogan footage. We went and looked at some of the shit. It's like, fuck. And however Joe and I came up with the idea, it was like, hey, what if we do a videotape best of the 80s? Because there's some great shit in there. Well, and Mike let Joe and I go do it. We went down to Rochester, the Mayo Civic Arena, or wherever it was. Yep. We shot the intros and the outros. And it was fun as hell.
I remember you and I, and it was during the time where you were in there watching me dub, and we just started talking about the library. And this was, if I'm not mistaken, I think we did best of the 80s in, I think it was in 1990.
It was in 1990. Yep.
But we're sitting around just talking about it. I remember the conversation coming up about the earlier stuff, but Verne didn't keep a lot of that. There was a smattering of barely any 60s, all right amount from the 70s, but Al DeRusha from August of 1980 on stopped recording over old tapes. Verne had to spring for the money for new 1-inch tapes and 3/4 inch. But you and I were sitting there talking about it. It's like, what the hell can we do with it? And I'm going to give you credit for this. You're the one that said, let's talk to Mike and put together something about all of the footage from the 1980s. We went in, we talked to Mike, and as you said, he let us go. And he told Verne, just let these two produce this together, put it together, which we did. We did have a small budget. I remember going to Channel 11. Remember the, we'd have different chapters in a book.
Yeah.
And then we couldn't do that in house because we had that cable access graphic system that didn't fucking be on air any place. You know, before the internet, I'm using actual videotape, so I had to go out of house to get some of that stuff, including the open with the globe coming, outer space, and then that was all done at WTCN. Yeah. We put it together, and when we got done producing it, I remember having Verne and Greg come in. I had literally stayed up the entire night, the night before, and when everybody came in, I said, I'm going to hit play. I had a pillow and a blanket on the back of the room because of the dubbing. I could do 3 hour, 2 1-inch tapes and 2 3/4 at a time, because that's all we had. And we had to do that for 70 markets. So I can't tell you how many times I'd have an alarm clock. I'd set it for 55 minutes. So the alarm would go off, put on another fucking set of dubs. But anyway, so we played the best of the 80s. I went back and I ended up falling asleep. So it was like 9, 10 in the morning, and I had not slept that night. And I can't even remember countless hours that we had put in before that. But it turned out to be a pretty damn good product, I think, for its time.
You know, it really did. And along with this process, I actually sold the rights to that tape, Best of the 80s, to a Canadian company called Famous Players.
Mm-hmm.
before we had it finished. I pitched him on an outline, and I went to Toronto, cut the deal. Famous Players at the time owned a bunch of they were a movie theater chain, but they also did home video as well. So I sold him the rights, and I think it was for 75 grand or something, which is ridiculously low, really, for what we gave them. But at that time in 1990, a $75,000 check was a major home run in AWA. So you really not only produced a great tape, a great video, but it made money before we even finished it. So I was really proud of that effort. But more than anything, it was so much fun, and I learned a ton. You know, you learn so much more by actually doing something than well, I do. I actually have to do it in order to get a feel for it, as opposed to watching somebody do it or reading a book about it or a YouTube video or whatever. I just got to get my hands dirty, because then I really begin to understand the process.
You know, I want to jump in here, guys, because I'm listening to this, and Joe has talked about you, Eric, you know, on and off, but I knew you worked together. I did not know how deep the connection was. And I find it absolutely fascinating, not only from the friendship standpoint, from the professional standpoint, but when I hear you talk about your interest in getting your hands dirty and the 1-inch tapes and the threading and the editing and the dubbing and everything else, anybody who thinks that this is an overnight sensation story is just, this opened up a lot of eyes, I'm sure, because to hear you tell it about how you got involved from the ground up and your connection with Joe, I've just been sitting here listening, and I find it fascinating. And again, Joe's talked about, oh yeah, Eric and I did this, but I had no idea how far back the connection went and how deep.
Yeah, no, and I'm not saying this just because I'm on here with Joe. I don't do that kind of thing. I'm being very, very sincere. It was because of the time that Joe gave me, and he just allowed me to look over his shoulder and make me feel welcome to kind of learn as much as I could by watching. If I hadn't been interested and been allowed to learn more of the process, and Mike Shields gave me a great opportunity to do that as well in other areas of the wrestling business. But if I had not been given those opportunities to just sit and watch and learn and ask questions, I would have not ended up where I am, where I was. Because here's what ultimately happened is when the door shut at AWA, I'd been working there for a long time, probably like Joe, without getting paid. And when we were paid, it was kind of half-assed, intermittent, right? I needed a job. I couldn't ride it out any longer. And when it was inevitable, I went to Verne and said, Verne, I got to make a move. With all due respect, I don't want you to find out from somebody else. I'm going to send a tape down to WCW. Verne gave me his blessing to go, because I asked him, gave him the respect that he deserved. And I got down there. Fortunately, I got a job as an announcer, but here's where Verne and AWA and Joe and learning how to thread a 1-inch tape machine by myself and all of that. Here's where it paid off. When Bill Shaw, who was the VP of Turner Broadcasting at the time, Human Resources, said he was going to hire an executive producer to oversee WCW television, I threw my name in the hat, and I ended up getting the job. I ended up becoming president of WCW eventually, not because I was the most talented guy in the office, but because I had experience at every level of the wrestling industry. I had touched it, and not necessarily great at any of it, but when it came to production, I had a fundamental understanding. By the time I got to WCW, I couldn't do it, but I had a little bit better than a fundamental understanding of the post-production process and the production process. I knew fundamentally how to promote live events, because Verne gave me that opportunity down in Mason City, Iowa. I not only cleared the market, meaning I sold them the AWA show in syndication and opened the market up, Verne allowed me, and Mike Shields allowed me to promote my own show there by myself, guided me, made sure I covered all my bases, but I got to do it. So I learned a little bit about that. I learned a lot about syndication and advertising and what advertisers are looking for in television. I learned what Nielsen ratings were and how they supposedly work. I knew so much about all the different aspects of the industry, as opposed to a lot of other people who only knew one or two aspects of the business. And it's that broad base of knowledge because of the time, guys like Joe, Mike Shields, Verne, at the time, even Greg, he's kind of a dipshit now, but whatever. It was that time that I was able to just learn by being in the room and eventually doing some of the stuff that gave me a really big advantage. And I think is one of the reasons why I ended up as president of WCW and had the opportunity to do the crazy stuff I did.
So, Eric, let's back up a little bit from the WCW and even best of the 80s. Let's talk about that morning, interview day, when we found out that Larry Nelson called in. And I remember there was we had a reel-to-reel audio player right by the audio console when you first came in the control room. I remember standing there in a huddle, Verne going, "What the hell are we going to do?" And I can't remember who said it. I think it was you that said, "I'll do it."
No, I wasn't in that room.
You weren't in the control room then?
Not when Verne said and I'll give you my perspective on this. Sure. And it's vague. It happened quite a while ago. But at that point in time, I was not really welcome on the production side of the office when they were doing market edit promos. Verne was still kind of kayfabe-ish to me.
Kind of? Fuck.
And since I wasn't involved in the wrestling side of things, I had nothing to do with that at the time. I was just selling AWA in local markets. I was on the business side. I was not on the wrestling side. And Verne, they didn't talk smart around me. I mean, that was off limits on those days when Verne would fly all the talent in from all over the country and spend a day doing marketed promos. I stayed in my office on the office side. So I'm in my office. I don't know if it was Mike or Greg came to my office and said, because I kept a sport coat and a shirt and tie in my office. I didn't wear it all day, but I kept it in my office in case an appointment came up that I should look presentable for. So I had this stuff in my office, and somebody, Verne or Greg or Mike, came and said, "Hey, Eric, you have a sport coat and a tie?" And I said, "Yeah." Put it on and follow me. Now that was weird because I typically wasn't very welcome. Nobody was going to throw me out if I walked back there, but I knew I wasn't really welcome. So I just never went near it. Now I'm being asked to go in there with all the talent in there. Verne's in there. They're shooting wrestling stuff. Oh my God. I've never seen that before. What am I doing here? And why am I being asked to dress up? This is weird to me. But I got in the office, and when I got into the production studio, it was like, okay, here's what we want you to do. That's the part I remember. Now, there may have been more to it that I wasn't exposed to, or I just don't remember.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to also remember, because this was before you started dyeing your hair, like we saw in that photo. But Didn't you or somebody run to the local drugstore to get black hair dye or something before you did your very first marketed interview?
No,
were you gray?
No, but I wasn't that gray at that time. I mean, I had some gray, but it wasn't like it is now, for sure.
No.
No, I was probably 75% black, maybe more 80, but I did have some gray in there. I didn't really start dyeing my hair until WCW.
Well, if you take a look at that picture with Verne, though, you were jet black in that.
Or maybe I
one.
did dye. I don't remember though.
Yeah, I for whatever, and maybe I was misremembering, because again, this is 19. Would that have been what, 87?
88.
88.
88.
So shit, that was 36 years ago.
Oh, I know.
I barely remember what I had for lunch yesterday, let alone a lot of these details.
But that moment was so much fun. I mean, we could do an entire episode just on that day, because I had no idea. Again, no idea what I was doing.
But Eric, you did, because like you were talking about going into this, you exposed yourself in every little area. You would not, and I know you would not have accepted to do these interviews if you did not think that you could do it. And you knew that you could do it because you watched Larry Nelson do it for all of this time. You were a professional wrestling fan. I do remember after that shortened interview day, I remember you telling me that you were scared shitless.
Yes.
On that very first interview. You were so nervous, and rightfully so. But your exposure to everything prior to that in wrestling led you, well, to where you are today and all of the successes that you had. You absorbed different elements in the business, and announcing was one of them.
Yeah, well, thank you, Joe. But I was scared. I didn't know what I was doing. You're right, Joe. I mean, look, I had been in front of a camera before. I was, at the time, I met my wife when I was a model in Minneapolis. I did commercial stuff for like Target and Montgomery Ward's and Sears. Went to Chicago, did a lot of stuff for print, right? So a camera necessarily, I was very comfortable in front of a camera for still photography, or if it was a TV commercial. This required a speaking part. This required me. I remember, I don't know who it was. Might have been you, Joe. I think you might have been running the camera. I don't remember. But somebody, or it could have been, it was probably Greg. I think Greg was directing it then. Greg said, okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to see the guy behind the camera, Joe. He's going to count you down. He points to you. That's your cue. That's when you go. Now you've got 1 minute and 30 seconds. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to talk about the town. I want you to tell everybody where they're going to get. Oh, by the way, there's no such thing as a. Oh no, we did have a little, a funky little.
We didn't have a teleprompter. No. If we needed to, we would just have like white cards.
Yeah. So there's no teleprompter for me to work off of, and I'm getting this direction. When cue, that means go. You'll see the red light come on. Here's what I want you to do. We're going to Mason City, Iowa. I want you to give them the date. Here's what time the show starts. Right? Here's where they can buy tickets. Oh, by the way, this is a fundraiser, so this is for the Kiwanis Club in Mason City, Iowa. And then I want you to introduce Larry Zbyszko. And when Larry Zbyszko walks into the scene, you're going to set up his promo because he's going to be wrestling so-and-so. And then you'll hand him the mic and he'll take it from there. When he hands you the mic back, I want you to close it up by reminding people where they can buy their tickets, where the event's taking place, and what time it starts.
And you got 1.5 minutes.
And you got to do it in 1.5 minutes. Not in 1:35. Not in 1:25. In 1:30. Because when you see this, that means you're getting ready to get counted down. When you see this, that means you got 30 seconds. And then you're going to get a 10, 9, 8. You've got to be up before he gets to 1. Okay. Do that. No. So here's what happened. And Joe, I hope you remember this because I'd love to hear your side of the story. And now I got a whole room full of wrestlers. They're all watching me, the new kid. Oh, this is going to be fun. They're all standing there. Larry Zbyszko is my first promo. And I get the countdown. I get through the open somehow. And I bring Larry in. And I forget what I'm going to say. I forget what to do next. And I look at Larry, and he could just see I'm deer in the headlights, just gone. Larry doubles over, belly laughing. As soon as he gives permission to the other 20 people in the room double over and barrel laugh. Yeah, that's my first promo.
Not only in the studio, but I was actually directing. And remember Will Bryan? He was in. Yeah. Will, by the way, sadly passed away last year.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But anyway, so when that happened, we all busted up in the control room as well. I was directing the interviews, but but the thing is, what I remember about it, Eric, what you had done up to that point for your very first time under those circumstances, you did pretty damn good. And I remember turning to Mike saying, I think he's going to be able to catch on to this, but you just got to give him time.
Yeah, and they did. They gave me a day. And then Verne immediately started looking for somebody else to replace him. And they brought in Ralph Strangis. Remember Ralph?
Ringside Ralph.
Ralph. And actually they brought one other person in before Ralph. They brought that guy in, and he sucked actually worse than I did.
Bob Montana.
Yeah, Bob Montana.
Oh my God, Bob Montana.
They sent me back to my office after that first day, which I was grateful for. And then they brought in Bob Montana, and he was actually worse than me, I think, because they brought me back to do it again a couple of weeks later while they were looking for somebody else. So I established myself firmly as the number one backup. And when they didn't have somebody, because they couldn't find anybody, because Verne wasn't paying anybody either. So it was a little hard to find somebody that was good that would work for what Verne would pay for. And Montana didn't work out, so they brought me back. I did it for a couple more weeks. Then they brought in Ralph Strangis. And Ralph was good. I liked Ralph, man. He went on to be play-by-play for the Dallas North Stars.
Yeah, right.
For a long time.
Worked with Ralph for a long time. But then we started working together, and I guess, I don't know, I just ended up, I think they tried to find other people, but I think it's kind of like, here's what it was like. This is why they went with me. Joe, I'm convinced. Thought a lot about this. It's like you're riding down the road with your dog, and your dog passes gas in the car, and it's the winter time, so you can't roll down the windows. So you're just stuck with it. and you resign yourself to the fact, number one, that your dog needs a different food, but also you get used to the smell. You just get nosebleed. No matter how bad it is, you just become nosebleed to it. And I think they got so tired of trying to find somebody to replace me, because I really wasn't very good, that they became noseblind to how bad I stunk up the joint.
That has to be the greatest analogy I've ever heard. How phenomenal. Eric, wow.
I'm totally putting that on social media where Eric compares himself to a dog fart.
Absolutely.
Hey, it's the truth.
Eventually somebody will say that about him anyway. So unfortunately, Eric, one thing that really hit home with me when you talked about how Larry busted out laughing when you kind of froze there. They do that to the new guy. I mean, I remember when I went in and I auditioned for the ring announcer spot, and I'm doing my thing or whatever it was. They told me to promote a show, make up a show in my head and promote it. And off to the side, about 10 feet away from me, Jim Lanning, Sold Out Houston is mooning me. He's dropping his drawers with that megaton ass of his about 10 feet away, and I didn't flinch. And I kept going with it. But man, they indoctrinate you, and they have fun at your expense. And damn it, I hear these stories, and again, I reiterate what I said before. If anybody thinks that Eric Bischoff was an overnight success and that you didn't earn your stripes in this business, everything that you're saying right now is testament to you, to the stick-to-itiveness, to the determination to make it in spite of Verne not paying you what he said he was going to pay you. So kudos for that, which brings me to my next question about Verne Gagne. you said that Verne gave you his blessing when you went to WCW in 1990. Of course, by that point, I think Verne is, seeing the writing on the wall. So much has been written and said about Verne Gagne over the years, a lot of it from people who are absolutely clueless, not only to Verne's background, but to the businessman that he was. Give me your take on Verne Gagne, both from a professional and a personal standpoint.
Well, to be really honest about it, I didn't know Verne when things were rocking and rolling in the AWA. What do I know? I know that AWA, especially now, because I've worked with so many people and become friends with so many people who wrestled in different who wrestled in different territories at the time when Verne was hot, and they all say the same thing. AWA was the territory they wanted to be in. And obviously very, very successful. So I can only assume, because I didn't know Verne at that time and wasn't involved, that Verne built a very, very good business based upon the business model that existed at the time in the territory system. I know that Verne was very well, he was very much a part of the community, in the business community, as well as the athletic community. He's very, very well respected. I know that Verne spent a lot of time supporting other charities and events outside of athletics. That's really all I know of Verne in terms of the businessman, because by the time I got to AWA in 1987, Okerlund had left, Heenan had left, Hogan had left, Hennig had left. All of the big stars were gone, and Verne was desperately trying to hold on to his business model because he believed, I think he believed at least, that this WWF thing is going to be a flash in the pan.
Yeah.
And it's all going to come back to the way things used to be. And I understand that, because there's a lot of people think like that in a lot of different businesses, not just Verne and wrestling. But anyway, here's what I will say about Verne person. First of all, I will always love Verne Gagne and respect him for what he did for not just me, but for my family, more importantly. I wouldn't be talking to you guys today, for sure, had it not been, of course, Mike and Joe and others, and Greg even, because there's a lot of influences there. But had Verne not given me, ultimately, the one that gave me the opportunity, my kids would not have had the life that they've been able to have. And that's not to suggest that this is wealth and all that, but the experiences that come along with a dad who's in the wrestling industry and has been able to take them around the world. I took my kids to Japan on business with me when they were like 10 and 12 years old. What kid gets that opportunity? I would have had that opportunity were it not for. So and I could sit here all day and give you examples of the things that I would never had experience, nor would have my wife or my children, and now my grandson, had it not been for the opportunity that Verne gave me. And I will never look at it any other way than that. I got to know Verne personally outside of working with him because Verne loved to hunt. I loved to hunt. Verne loved German short hair pointers. I raised and trained German short hair pointers. So we had that in common outside of the wrestling business. And I didn't hunt with him a lot. I didn't get a lot of opportunities with Verne. I wish I would have had more, but I did get to go out and hunt with Verne Gagne and Wahoo McDaniel and Ray Stevens.
Oh boy.
And if you don't think that's one of my personal highlight reels that play in the back of my head about 3 times a day, you don't know me very well.
Eric, I've said many times about Ray, one of my favorites because of that infectious guttural laugh of his.
Yeah.
And he was a fucking 12-year-old kid when he was in his 50s. Ray Stevens never grew up, and that was part of his charm. But that laugh of his, and always he and Ray and I, who could flip each other off first in the morning, game that we played for a couple of years.
And again, remember at the end of the day, because Wahoo and Ray were booking, and Greg was in there with them, obviously. and then Verne would, sign off or whatever their process was. But at the end of the day, there's a big refrigerator in the hallway, and at the end of the day, it was nice to grab a couple beers, sit down with Wahoo and Ray and Joe and Greg, and occasionally Verne would pop in and just tell freaking stories. If you don't think for a guy like me, again, that's such a personal highlight. What an experience just to listen to the stories and learn and visualize what things were like back then when they were talking about the 70s, and how great the 70s were. It was so much fun.
Eric, thanks so much for putting this kind of a spin on Verne Gagne. And the reason I say that is quite obvious. The modern day wrestling fans, let's face the AWA, the heyday of the AWA was 35, 36 years ago or better. So a lot of people look at Verne's legacy as, oh, well, if he would have kept Hulk Hogan, if he would have done this, he would have done that. I think that you and Bobby Heenan are the two guys that I would say have been most complimentary to Verne. And I know we've just talked about it for a little bit here. But Verne was a professional, and all he expected was for people to be professionals, come in and do their job. And he hung on to the old school philosophy. Yeah, maybe long after he should have. But I really appreciate what you said about Verne. I think it's great.
No, and it's all true. I mean, look, it's funny. When I was in the AWA, of course, I'd hear Verne's side of a story about Hulk, for example. I'd hear Greg's side of the story about whoever, Hulk in this case we're talking about. I heard Verne's side of the story about Vince McMahon coming in and trying to buy him out. So I heard a lot about the WWF and Vince McMahon from Verne Gagne and Greg to a degree. And of course, I ended up working with Vince and company, and I got to hear their side of the story about what really went down when Vince tried to buy him out. And you learn, and all of the talent that I've worked with that at one point in time worked for Verne, and we'd all tell our own stories, and a lot of the stories from the talent side have to do with, well, he didn't treat me fairly, or he screwed me out of money, or he didn't do this for me, he didn't do that for me. You're going to hear that no matter who you work for.
That's right. Yeah.
I don't care if you work for a bank or if you're on the federal government's payroll. You're always going to have some kind of a gripe about the person that you work for. Yeah. And I began to, after I started, I hear one side of the story, I hear another side of the story. And then I started hearing stories about myself. And I went, what? People make up a lot of stuff. And you can't take what anybody says that's negative, in my opinion. I don't take what anybody says about anybody else as fact, because of just my experience of life and living through it. My experience with Verne, let me make it clear, because I said, I worked for a while for Verne without getting paid. It's not that he didn't pay me what he promised me. Verne was tapping out. Verne lost everything trying to keep AWA afloat. If Verne had good financial guidance, and Verne wasn't as stubborn as Verne was, because he was stubborn, he could have lived out his life as one of the wealthiest people in Minneapolis, but he didn't. He kept tapping into his reserves and taking mortgages out on his property over on Lake Minnetonka, and ultimately, spent his last dollar trying to keep AWA afloat. So there was a period of time towards the end when Verne wasn't able I wasn't able to get, I want to say Verne wasn't, when AWA wasn't able to make at least my payroll. But it wasn't because they didn't want to, or they were trying to screw me. And by the way, nobody forced me to stick around. I stuck around because of loyalty, because of my relationship with everybody there, because I knew selfishly, that's part of it, I knew that if I stepped away from the wrestling business, I'd never find a way back in. So it was my choice to stay under those conditions. I wasn't forced to. I wasn't intimidated into it. I wasn't coerced or lied to in any way, shape, or form. I voluntarily decided this is the business I want to be in. This is the best opportunity I have for the moment. I'm going to stick with it until I figure it out. So I want to make sure nobody thinks I was implying that I got screwed.
Eric, you're talking about the loyalty part of it. The doors finally closed in November of 1991. If I'm not mistaken, you were there to the very end because, to the best of my recollection, that last almost year, we had nothing new. We were doing old matches from the St. Paul Civic Center, and you were standing in front of that green screen with it was the wide shot. Actually, we did it from we got the wide shot from the Best of the 80s, with the lighting grid and the colored lights. But you were there till the very end, like I was, were you not?
I was, but I was already working for WCW, but I'd only work 2 days a week. I'd fly down on Sunday night. I'd work Monday. I'd work part of Tuesday, and I'd fly home Tuesday night. So I was back in Prior Lake.
Yep.
So I was probably popping in and out doing whatever there was to do.
Well, you were talking about not getting paid. That last year, I got my pay cut in half, and to do a set of talking heads with you and then cut together what I already had on tape, I could get everything done for that week within a day. Dubs were a little bit more, as you very well know, that painstaking process. But I'm thinking back on that last year and just thinking how we all knew the end was near. It's like, having a parent go into hospice and just know, the time is coming. We just didn't exactly know when.
You and Joe have mentioned that the handwriting was kind of on the wall at that point. Certainly by 1990, it was life support at very, very best. And you also talked about how stubborn Verne was and how he went into all his coffers and spent everything to try to keep the AWA alive. My guess is that a lot of people were maybe telling him, Verne, come on, this is, you're going to drive yourself to an early grave here, whatever it might be. From your standpoint, and I ask you this because I had a little deal with Verne in Vegas in 1987. He kind of had a little bit of a snit fit on me when I was doing some TV. And I came back and I talked to Nick Bockwinkel about it. And Nick's take was, Verne isn't yelling at you. And this is 1987. Verne isn't yelling at you. He sees everything crumbling around him. There probably isn't anybody he hasn't yelled at. Was Verne really of the mindset going into 1990 that there was still a chance?
Sure.
Wow.
Sure. And I'm not so, again, I wasn't involved in any of the conversations, clearly. But I had gotten, I don't know, I guess I won't say close enough. I think Verne and Mike and everybody else was comfortable enough with me that they didn't hide anything. I mean, I would be in a room, we'd be sitting with four of us talking about what Verne thinks might be another option or another opportunity to try to keep things afloat. So I would hear the conversations. Verne had some very good relationships in Chicago with some very powerful families and people in broadcasting, WGN in particular. And some very, very strong, long-standing relationships there. WGN was a superstation, just like TBS was. That was a big opportunity. I think it was Jerry Reinsdorf was the name that comes to mind in Chicago, or the Reinsdorf family. I can't remember. But, and I think based on, again, what I heard just being in the room, that there was not only an effort and an opportunity, there was people were working towards getting a deal done. Ultimately, deals never got done. But Verne believed there could. When I say he was stubborn, I actually mean it in kind of a good way. He was determined. There's a fine line between determined and stubborn. And Verne probably lived on that fine line for a long time during this period of time. But he wasn't going to give up. Here's another little thing that people may or may not know about. All the while Verne is struggling and tapping into his reserves to keep AWA afloat, The state of Minnesota had filed an eminent domain claim on his property. Verne had a beautiful piece of property. I don't know how big it was, but to me it looked like 30 acres. I don't know what it was. Right on Lake Minnetonka. It looked like a national park. Beautiful home, horse barn. Verne Gagne loved her horses. Absolutely gorgeous place on Lake Minnetonka. It had to be worth a fortune. I'm not sure if this is true, but I believe that Verne actually owned it outright. Didn't have a lien on it originally. State of Minnesota felt the same way I did and said, that would make a hell of a park. Let's take it. You believe that shit?
Yep.
Let's take it. And we'll give Verne whatever we feel he should get for it. We'll decide what he should get. This is a home that Verne spent his entire life, his career, paying for. And now the state of Minnesota was going to come in and take it from him. All the while, talent that was a part of the AWA, the Hogans, the Okerlunds, the Heenans, and everybody else jumped ship.
Yeah.
Verne's trying to rebuild AWA, and then the state comes in and puts their claws into his property. So he's got to fight that legal battle, which cost him a fortune.
Mm-hmm.
He hired an attorney, Bob Ryan, full-time to handle what little AWA legal business there was, but primarily to try to fight the state of Minnesota. All this is going on while Mick Karch, you're in Vegas getting yelled at. I'm probably got an earful from time to time. Talent probably got an earful from time to time, but it's not that hard to understand why.
Exactly. Right. Wow. Yeah, it was tough sailing for Verne at the end there. And again, people who denigrate Verne and talk about if he would have done this and he would have done that, well, that's fine and good. Maybe he made some mistakes. Maybe some of the business dealings didn't pan out the way they should have. Vince McMahon was 6-7 years into the juggernaut by the time the AWA folded. Yeah, I get where Verne was coming from. And it's a sad ending, I guess, to a great legacy of the AWA.
Well, Eric, the deal that you're talking about with WGN, part of that was to have Hogan be the centerpiece. If the deal could have been done, WGN would have taken the product only if Hogan would have been signed. There was just, and I don't know the exact moment that the deal fell through, but they needed both WGN, because we were there. We needed WGN to agree to it and Hogan to agree to it. And sadly, it never happened. You combine that with Verne losing the ESPN contract. And then also, I remember Mike Shields telling me this, that he had gotten a deal done with Bob Sayers, RJS Marketing out of New York.
I remember Bob.
He had the independent territories that were left. Bob was able to put it together to do a national network to sell PIs and advertising. And it was going to be, Verne would have made $60,000 a month off of this deal. And he turned it down because he didn't want to share the revenue with what he thought were some of the lesser known territories. So you combine those two things with the shit that he was dealing with his property, which I agree, fucking fantastic piece of land on Lake Minnetonka and an incredible house. But anyway, you take all of that together, and when the when those WGN, ESPN, and Bob Sayers, when those three things didn't happen, that was, I knew right then and there that it was the end. It's just a matter of time. Life support, the AWA was put on life support after those three things.
Yep. But I'll never forget, man, I had so many good times there. I remember going duck hunting with Verne and Greg. They had a little place, I don't remember where it was, but we drove up there and spent a nice cabin right on a lake, perfect little duck blind. You could walk 30 feet outside of the cabin. And, you know, those are the memories. Those are the things I remember. Like, I don't remember You know, for me, I don't ever want to speak like everybody feels like I do or thinks like I do, but I can't remember pain. Like I know if I broke my leg, I know that it hurt, but I can't relive it in my head. I can't remember how it felt. And I think that's probably pretty common. We all know something. Oh man, when I fell off that barn roof, I broke both my legs. That hurt. But you can't relive that pain. Your brain doesn't let you do that. And I feel the same way about, whatever tough times I went through. And in fact, I don't look back at any of those times as negative at all. I'm grateful for every second of it, even the stuff that was a little tough to get through. I only remember the good shit. I don't remember laughing. I only remember Joe and I sitting around with Wahoo and Ray, laughing our asses off, drinking a beer at the end of the day on a Tuesday. That's what I remember. The rest of the stuff is, it's fact, it happened, but shit, life happens.
Yeah, I mean, I'll equate it to like a marriage. I mean, I've been with my wife now we've been married 26 years and together for 33. Has it been all roses? Of course not. No relationship is. You remember, the good and the bad, but at the end of the day, it's in the case of my wife, it's the love that I have for my wife. And as that relates to the AWA, I genuinely loved it. Was only 6 years from 85 to 91 that I worked for the live promotion called the AWA. I mean, I did the pay-per-views from 2000 to 2003 before it was sold to Vince in March of 2003. But I'm looking at a total of 10 years of my life with the AWA. I wouldn't have traded that for anything. Every bad moment doesn't compare to the good memory. Let me rephrase that. The great memories that I had of the AWA. And here it is, 39 years later, I'm co-host of a podcast talking about the old times of the AWA, talking to you again, Eric. And I, 4 years ago up in Duluth, we had that, a talk for a little bit. When I found out you were going to be in Duluth, by the way, it was like, holy shit, I haven't seen Eric since 1991. I can't wait. But it's just amazing, not only for us, but the staying power to this day of the AWA. And I got to say, AWA Unleashed, I think we have a big part in keeping alive those memories of what happened during those AWA times, because there's not a lot of us left.
No.
Well, what's fascinating, Joe, when you talk about the legacy of the AWA, I make personal appearances on the average of twice a month. I'm in somewhere signing autographs or doing question and answers or whatever. Twice a month, usually throughout the year. Doesn't matter where I go. If it's a Q&A, AWA comes up. There's still a lot of people out there that know about the AWA. And in some cases, depending on the market I'm in, really, really have fond memories of the television product AWA. And Hulk Hogan's probably one of my closer friends. We still talk fairly often, and I see him over the holidays when I go down to Florida for Christmas to see my kids. But when you get guys like Hulk talking about Verne, now forget about the business side of it, because everybody's got a story. But talking about Verne person and what Hulk learned from Verne, Hulk will give credit to Verne almost every single time. When people ask me, well, who really created the Hulk Hogan character? The Hulk Hogan character became famous in WWF. But the Hulk Hogan character was created by Verne Gagne in the AWA.
Damn right.
And when Kurt was alive, and worked with me, a lot of conversations about Verne. Take the business side of it out, nothing but respect for Kurt when it came to Verne. And a lot of people. One of the reasons that I was able to find my way through dealing with talent as well as I could, not that I did a great job, but as well as I could, was because there were certain talents that knew how I came up, that knew where I got at least my point of view for wrestling from. Because, when I started doing, I'd never done play-by-play for anything before. Never even thought about it. But because somebody had to do it, I got the call. And it was Verne, it was Greg to a degree, it was Mike Shields, Joe had input, Lee Marshall, when Lee came in eventually to AW, all of those people helped me understand how to do play-by-play and therefore how to see the wrestling presentation through the eyes of a director as opposed to through the eyes of a fan. And learning that and the psychology of learning how to do play-by-play, really learning what the job of play-by-play really is. It's a very difficult job. It's a very complex job. But it's a very, very important part of the overall narrative of the product. But if you don't really understand your role as a play-by-play person compared to a color person, for example, color guy is going to do a completely different angle of attack in terms of commentary than a play-by-play person is. At least they should. I learned that from Verne and Mike and Greg and Joe and Lee. And it's those kinds of stories that you'll hear from a lot of people who learned on the job from Verne. And those people all went on to be very successful, by the way.
Well, you talk about the different roles, Eric. I mean, you've done pretty much all of them on there, but I'll use the analogy of like a football team. Yep. Okay. You got 11 guys on offense, but what the quarterback does is going to be different than what a lineman does, than a running back does, that a wide receiver does. And it's the same thing with being an announcer talent, shall we say, doing the promos or interviews, completely different than play-by-play. That's completely different than color commentary. All of those are completely different than being a ring announcer. They're all vital to the product, but they are so different. And I'm going to go back and give you the stroke. You absorbed on every level that you did, whether it was in front of the camera or behind the camera, you absorbed it and transformed that into what is now has been an incredible career that you have done. I remember watching WCW when it first came out and you came on camera. I gotta say it was a combination of laughter, just because, and not laughing at you.
No, I understand.
Just laughing that it's like, oh my God, Eric fucking Bischoff is on WCW. But then also admiring what you were able to accomplish from it. And dare I say, what small role that I had in helping to groom you, I guess, in some way, shape, or form of leading to that success. And then to see you on WWE after, everything fell apart after 83 weeks. It's like watching you. I honestly, I felt proud to have been a part of helping to raise you in the industry. Now, having said that, I was still being raised at the same time. Right. I knew video production. I didn't get into the promoting side of it. I didn't get, I was production from day one. And unlike you, the first moment I stepped into a post-production suite when I was at Brown Institute, I fell in love with the behind the scenes. I wanted to be a play-by-play announcer for professional sports. But I saw those buttons and lights and I knew what the hell I wanted to do. Then when Kathy Gagne offered, asked me to come in and do those first interviews with Garvin and Regal and Precious, oh, fuck, I jumped at that chance. Here it is 39 years later, and I'm talking about it still, and surprisingly, people have a genuine interest, and I love that.
Well, guys, it's just like when I first sat down and when you first rolled tape. But hearing, Roger Kent's voice, I don't know if it was Roger Kent or Al DeRuccia or whoever it was, but hearing those voices, that music, some of the clips from those I still remember the Mad Dog Vachon promo when I saw it happen on TV when I was like 16 or 17. I still remember it. I remember watching AWA when Hulk Hogan first came onto the scene. He walked in, cameras looking at it. I don't know if it was Marty or Gene or it was probably, I don't know who it was. But I remember because they've been talking about this new monster that was coming to the AWA. And I was sitting in my living room. It was Saturday evening. I was probably getting ready to go out and chase a girl. And it was before I got to go out. And I'm watching, and Hogan walks in. He's back to the camera. He enters the scene right from the side of the camera, walks right into the frame. All you saw was his left or his right shoulder and his right arm. And he walks in, stands in front of Gene Oakland, and just does a bicep pose. The camera zooms in on his bicep. It's those little things that stand out in my memory that I can see, like I saw it yesterday. That's how vivid some of these memories are. Like the Mad Dog stuff. Some of those promos from the AWA are the most vivid in my mind, including ones that I was a part of. It's watching those videos that left such a big impression. I mean, it's all from the AWA. When I heard that music, I saw those graphics. It's like macaroni and cheese from my memory. Macaroni and cheese is like a comfort, feel good. When you eat macaroni and cheese, it's shitty. It's horrible for you. You shouldn't eat it, but you do because it just makes you feel good, like when you were a kid. And that's the way I felt when I watched the opening of your show.
That's the amazing thing with professional wrestling is so many people have that connection from their youth of professional wrestling. And for many, that's led to a lifelong infatuation, fandom, whatever it is that you want to call it. But it's unlike any other industry. I can hear a song from when I was growing up, and it brings back some memories, but not in the same way that professional wrestling does. Whether it was, me seeing Crusher and Mad Dog in a main event at the old St. Paul Auditorium in a cage match, anything from the 1970s. I was born in 65, so the 70s was my heyday. And then, of course, you get into the early 80s, which was arguably the hottest time of the AWA, right on through, and I've talked about 6 years' time. But those memories, as long as I have my mind to me, and some say I've already lost it, but professional wrestling, it's just the fondness and even the bad memories of, we talked about earlier of Sayers and ESPN and the WGN deal. To me, those are still fond memories because it all ties into the AWA. And I will never forget it as long as my health is with me.
Yeah, me too, man. I'm right there with you.
Eric and Joe, I'm the old fart here.
How old are you, Mick?
I am in my early 70s.
Oh, you are old as shit.
Thanks, pal. That's it. Bullet to the head.
No. I'll be 69 on Monday, so I'm not that far behind. Oh, my God.
Hey, you're not that far behind.
By the way, happy early birthday, Eric. And I remember your birthday because mine is May 30th. I'll be 59. So you got me.
Happy birthday to you.
You pup. Ciupik, you're a pup. You're talking about the memories, guys. And the reason I bring up the old fart part of it is I saw my first wrestling match live in 1960 at the Minneapolis Auditorium. My grandfather and my dad took me to the show, and I talked about it, Eric. Tag team match, main event, Tiny Mills and Stan Kowalski teaming up against Verne Gagne and a Baltimore Colt football player, Gene Big Daddy Lipscomb. That was the main event. And these are the days when kids could go up to the ring apron, get an autograph while the guys were in the ring. There was no barricades or anything like that. All these years later, like it was yesterday, I remember Verne is signing autographs and I'm kind of getting lost in the shuffle and all these arms in front of me. And my dad says, Nick, give it to Verne, give it to Verne. I turn around and look at Verne is grabbing my autograph pad and signing the Verne Gagne. And that was all those years ago. And honest to God, it's like it was yesterday. When I met Nick in 1971, I mean, the memories are so vivid when you're a wrestling fan. I talked to Joe and Chris. It's funny how a lot of life, you don't go by the days on the calendar. You go by what happened in pro wrestling. That's what happens when you're, oh, yeah, I remember, God, 1981, I got married, but Nick Bockwinkel pinned so-and-so, which was the highlight of that year. Talk about the relationships, Eric, over the years that you've developed, because the first time I went out to Cauliflower Alley Club, which was in 2000, I'm a kid in a candy store, and I'm seeing Crusher and Pompero Firpo and, all these guys, Tex McKenzie, and they're all standing there, and they're all with canes or walkers or whatever, and they weren't talking about the matches. They weren't talking about the business. They were talking about the relationships, the friendships, the times on the road together, driving from town to town. That's what sticks with you. That's what you remember.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love where I live. I need a lot of space around me. I'm not good in crowds. I generally don't socialize very much at all. I have a very close group of friends that I am close to, but I don't maintain a lot of relationships outside of my family. But I do have some relationships because of wrestling that are some of the closest relationships I've ever had. I mentioned Hulk. Hulk and I went through some stuff together during one of the toughest parts of his life and developed a different level of relationship during that period of time. Diamond Dallas Page, who I met in AWA, actually. Hell of a story in AWA too, but we'll save it. But I met Diamond Dallas Page when I was working for Verne Gagne. Diamond Dallas Page to this day is one of my closest friends. Still comes out to Wyoming occasionally to visit. Sonny Ono, guy responsible, really, for that first phone call to Verne that got me in the door. That resulted in me sitting here today talking to you. Sonny and I are still very, very close friends. One of my best friends since 1977. He's coming out here to Wyoming in August, along with another great friend of mine from wrestling, Ernest the Cap Miller, who I hired and talked into getting into wrestling because he never saw himself doing it. I actually had to convince him to do it. Again, one of my closest friends. My son trained under Ernest and got his black belt, martial arts, from Ernest Miller. Ernest Miller is part of our family. He's coming out here in August to hang out for a little while. Another very good friend of mine who I didn't work with in wrestling, but because of wrestling, Conrad Thompson, who I do my podcast with. Undoubtedly one of my closest friends. I put my life in his hands in a second because of wrestling. So for me at least, wrestling is the epicenter of some of the strongest friendships and relationships I have.
I'm so glad that you said that. And I alluded to Cauliflower Alley, and I think this is it in a nutshell. I don't know how many years ago this was, but Bobby Heenan was there. He was going to be hosting one of the banquet nights with Mike Tenay. And Johnny Walker, Mr. Wrestling #2, came into the room. And first thing Johnny Walker does is he asks Bobby Heenan, how's Cindy? How's Cindy doing? Bobby's wife. And then Bobby asked Mr. Wrestling, how's your wife doing? Well, she had passed. And Bobby was not aware of this. And Bobby welled up with tears so quickly and there's this embrace, and you're looking at these two guys, these two grizzled veterans with all this history behind them. And when it came down to it, you're talking about wives, you're talking about family, you're talking about friendship. And I think people who are on the outside looking in at pro wrestling just don't grasp that. I mean, they can't imagine that the people that they're seeing on the screen are real people with real lives. And I don't know of anywhere where I have seen such camaraderie and such intensely close relationships that go on for 30, 40 years. These guys haven't seen each other in all that time, and they sit down and they pick up the conversation right where they left off.
Yeah, that's always fun. It's fun to be a fly on the wall and just listen when you hear those conversations.
Oh my God, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Joe, I think you're going to wrap her up here.
Yeah, I mean, Eric, we've been going for about an hour and a half plus here. So first of all, thank you for coming on to the show.
Oh, no, thanks. No, please. Thank you guys. And this is nothing but fun. So, no need to thank me. I'll do this anytime.
Well, before I wrap, I would be remiss if I didn't say, please say hi to Lori, Garrett, and Montana. I remember the kids. I mean, they were small back in the mid to late 80s when they were around, but I remember them. Of course, your beautiful wife, the hand model. She had the hands of gold back in the time, but say hi to them. Would love to come out and see out in Wyoming at some
We're
point.
always here, brother. We've got a big house. We got plenty of room. We're out on 20 acres, looking right up the valley into Yellowstone National Park. We're here. If you're coming through, you want to make a trip.
I got your number, and I'm not far from you. In fact, I drove through Wyoming last August. Had a drive down to Salt Lake. Our son lives in Greeley, Colorado for right now. So stopped there. I drove down specifically to spend a night with him and then drive to Salt Lake. But as I'm driving through my Wyoming, it's like, God, I wish I had another day. I'd text Eric or give him a call and see where the hell you work. I mean, beautiful country in Wyoming. But all of that aside, we would love to have you come back on and do more WCW and WWE stuff. We wanted to concentrate it for obvious reasons on the AWA right now. And I tell you, I mean, some of the stuff that you said brought back memories that I had forgotten about. And just what an incredible era. And I remember one conversation that you had with me. It was when I was making decent money, but I hadn't gotten a raise for the longest time. And you had told me, said, Joe, how old are you? And by this point, would have been
mid-20s.
Early 20s. I mean, I was 20 when I started with the AWA.
Wow.
26 when 26 when shit hit the fan. So I was early 20s. And I was upset. In fact, Greg and I had gotten into it because I complained I hadn't gotten any more money for a couple of years. And you is in the control room. We might have actually even been starting on the best of the 80s. But you said, Joe, how old are you? And I said my age. And he goes, you said, I would have given anything to have been in your position at your age. Working for a TV show that was internationally syndicated on ESPN, working for Verne Gagne and doing all of this stuff. And I remember stopping and thinking, yeah, you know what? You're right. I mean, I was extremely fortunate and in the right place at the right time to have even gotten an opportunity at the job. And I like to think I made the most of it while I was there. And that's why Greg and Verne asked me to revive the library in 2000. But to bring it back to Eric, again, thank you for the hour. We'll definitely want to see you back. 'Cause I got all kinds of shit to ask you.
Let's do it. Look, I'm going to be a little jammed up. No, just look. You tell me whenever you want to do it again. it'll usually take me a couple of days to figure out a calendar that'll work. Because my schedule is constantly moving around. But you give me a couple of days heads up and tell me when you want to do it, and we'll do chapter 2.
Love
Perfect.
it.
Oh my God, we could do up to chapter 22. And,
I'm here for you guys.
Absolutely
Look, and
fascinating.
we've been putting each other over, and I appreciate it. But on my side, I mean it, and I know you guys too. But again, I'll say this, Joe, not to make you feel bad. I wouldn't be sitting in this chair right now. I wouldn't have this beautiful home in Wyoming. You are part of the reason why I'm here. So I'll do as many shows as you guys want to do. Give me a heads up. We'll have a lot of fun because I enjoy doing it with you guys.
I appreciate those
Thanks,
words.
Eric.
I appreciate it, Eric.
Thank you so much.
All right,
See
guys.
you later. Easy.
I'm out. See ya.
All right, there he is, the one and only Eric Bischoff. And sometimes, guys, we have the formats and we have kind of a roadmap of where we want to go and kind of ideas we want to touch on. But the magic of what I feel a good show is, yeah, absolutely. When it goes in a direction, you either understand to lean into it, or you continue to try and force in the questions and the topics that you want. And I could tell early on that the connection, Joe, especially that you and Eric had, that relationship and the stories that you guys just went into telling naturally. There was so much about Eric, and I've read the book, I've got it, and I mean, I'm a wrestling fan, so of course I know the history, but to hear you guys back and forth tell those stories and give it some context, because one of the things that he says is context is king. To have the context, I thought was absolutely, it was astonishing, and well done to you guys, and particularly to you, Joe. That was really, really good.
I appreciate it, Chris. I've said it before about doing this podcast. You're the producer, Mick. Both of you come up with the sheets that we have every week. Mick does the pictures. All I do is format them. I don't do any prep for this because I lived it. Whether it was as a fan growing up, or later as a producer for the AWA. It's easy for me in that regard. But beyond that, I genuinely look forward to doing these because, as I alluded to earlier, the memories that come flooding back. And Mick, you had said it. It's like, okay, what happened in August of 1980? I couldn't fucking tell you in my personal life, but I can tell you that that's Hulk Hogan's very first interview in the AWA in the middle of the ring from the Minneapolis auditorium with luscious Johnny Valiant. If I had the AWA library as it was on the shelf back in the day, and you told me, Joe, I need a match of Larry Zbyszko versus Nick Bockwinkel. Well, that would have been from the Tropicana when he, turned on Nick and Ray, and that, turned Nick babyface. But what else happened in 1985? Fuck if I know. But I still think to this day, nobody knows that library better than me, because I hate to say for the love of it, but I will say for the passion of wrestling. And it is unlike any other industry, any other thing that I've ever been involved with. And to have the conversation that we had with Eric, I'll remember that was Friday of Memorial Weekend, 2024. That's just how this business works. Maybe not for everybody, but for me. And so I'll thank you, Chris, for asking me for Eric's phone number to get him on here. And when I found out that he was going to come on, I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait. I've never had any nervousness about doing this podcast, and I
feel like, I don't know if you agree with this, Mick. I feel like we were just listening to two old friends just chop it up.
No question about it. And, I had some questions, like you said, Chris. We got bullet points, we got topics we want to talk about, but I got immersed in that conversation.
Yeah,
and that's
so
why
did
I
I.
brought it up. That's why I said, listening to you guys talk about, and then you get this different perspective. We know Joe Ciupik. We know what an asshole he is. But you get this different perspective of Eric Bischoff, who had this nasty, arrogant heel persona in WCW and even into the WWE. And you listen to him talking about his respect for Verne Gagne and his respect for Joe, and how he, the student, to Joe Ciupik, the mentor, going back.
Did you say Ciupik the Dementor?
Demented.
Oh, very,
man.
very, very demented. But I will say this, and again, this goes to Joe's point too. You can't explain to non-wrestling fans what this business does to you, especially if you've been in it a long time. And I'm not talking about from the business side of it. There's so many stories and friendships, and my God, it is a community and a family unto itself, and you just can't describe it. And Joe, it was great listening to you. We didn't get to a topic about a certain wrestler that I know you were going to mention to.
We'll bring it up there.
We'll bring it up.
We will definitely get him, because I knew that when I had kind of kicked around the idea of having him on. I know that some people are going to look at it and poo-poo and say, well, it wasn't part of the AWA for that long. I understand. But hearing the backstory of kind of the interest in his grandma, like I've heard a lot of stories, from Eric, but I've heard things today that I don't think I've ever heard anywhere else. And I think that's just because of the comfort level that he had with you guys to hear those stories for the first time. And it kind of sets the table for this progression of Eric Bischoff, the businessman, because I could tell right away that this was going to be a business and more of a kind of inside baseball, inside production sort of show, which I kind of anticipated based on his background, based on your background, Joe. But it all adds up, and I feel like we're kind of getting to the mountaintop. And the next one that we do, it's not going to be so much AWA focused, so we're probably going to put that in our Patreon, because I know that we want to keep the primary AWA. That stuff is going to be out, the normal, but the part 2, the Eric Bischoff, where it's going to be talking more about the non-AWA stuff, we're going to put that in our Patreon. Not because we want to put it behind a paywall, but because we want to do it. But it's not going to it's going to be very non-AWA with him. So that's why I wanted to kind of set that up. But this was great, man. And you know what, to me, I'm already thinking more things. I don't know if you guys are thinking what I'm thinking,
absolutely.
but
Chris, there's volumes we can talk about with Eric Bischoff. I mean, if there's anybody outside of maybe Vince McMahon that knows this business inside and out from having been at the top of the business
and the bottom of the business.
Yeah, and it's Eric Bischoff. And very interesting, Chris, you sent a text. Kind of, we went back and forth as the three of us do. And I said something to the effect of, well, I hope he's in a good mood, when we get Eric on. And I mean, let's face it, we've had some people that have been very happy to be on the show, and some people that, Barry Darsow got pissed off at Joe for something. But your response to me, Chris, was, I think he's going to see this as like a breath of fresh air. And in listening to what Eric said at the end there, when he talked about his relationship with Joe, when he talked about, being able to talk about the relationships, and he said, this was fun. I will come back and do this anytime. Nobody was sniping at Eric Bischoff today. Nobody was second guessing how many guys were in the NWO. And I think he loved it. And
none of that shit matters.
Right.
It's for the pissed off little keyboard warriors in the internet wrestling community that want to use these insider terms that can't spell there and there or know the difference between your and your. So I don't really. If my 13-year-old has better grammar and spelling and a better education than you do, I can't look at your misspelled words and take anything you say seriously.
That's exactly right. And of course, you have to have 17 exclamation points and type in all capital letters, to get your point across. But I thought this was great. We're going to expand on what we talked to Eric about. Thankfully, I didn't dare bring up when he tossed me out of the locker room back in 1998 or whatever the hell it was.
What?
Pardon me?
What? You got thrown out of a locker room?
I got thrown out of the WCW.
Well, Nick, it was the woman's locker room. I mean,
that's here. No, that was another time, Joe. I've been tossed out of so many locker rooms. I don't know which end is up. But no, I got tossed out of the Nitro locker room by one Eric Bischoff back 25 years ago.
Oh, I'm going to bring that shit up.
Oh, thanks.